Yes, I have no desire ever to go back to Hampstead Pond. And it was, yes, it was very cold, and one couldn't complain because there were all these actual swimmers that were with you who were 80 and 90 years old. I mean, these guys go in February and break the ice, so I had nothing to fall back on. I couldn't go, I'm an actor. I'm cold.
Well, there was a scene in the film originally where we returned to Hampstead Ponds and George is swimming, and there's an old gay guy swims up to him and says, "Just in case you're interested, love, old Bill in the bushes watching," and then swims slowly off again. Which we really liked as a scene, but it's on the DVD.
Well, you use what you've seen, and you obviously use your memories if you have any. And I came here the first time in 1973, so a lot of the images are memories from that first trip or those first trips, but. We've studied a lot of material from that time as well. I'm not so fond about referring to other films when I do films myself. I try to find other references, like scents or colors, or we had an idea, or Heute, I should say, the director of photography, he had this word, if we could make it look like wintry foreskin. And
you succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we watched the series once before we started, but the series sort of is the book. So it was a positive experience because it's such a great adaptation. It set the bar very high. But there was no point in going back to the series. You may as well just go to the book because it's kind of almost page for page. They did all of the book, and we knew we weren't going to do that. We had to do something different. So no, we always just went back to the book. Mm.
Well, it was very hard because we had this sort of the ghost of Alec Guinness hovering over the project, and I didn't want to go with that to find someone that looked like him or had the same energy, but to find something else that who could depict Smiley, and we struggled with it a lot, and I think we discussed it for over 6 months before Gina J, the casting director, came up with the idea to ask Gary, and I thought it was brilliant the first time I heard it, and it takes a lot of experience and courage to do a portrait like this quiet, and to the courage to be as still and trust what the camera can communicate, and I'm very happy we asked you to do it.
Well, I didn't know what Smiley was going to be when I started. So it wasn't... any trepidation I had was purely in my head. The dragon that I had to slay was the ghost of Guinness. because even though other people had played, I think James Mason had played Smiley and Anthony Hopkins and Denham Millett had played him. He was the sort of face of Smiley, and for many the definitive interpretation. And so that was, if I had any pause for thought, it was that. From really being offered the role, I think I flip-flopped back and forth for about a month before I finally said yes. It was terror, absolute terror, and but you know, it's a fire that you walk through, and in the end of the day, I approached it much like you would a classical role. You know, if you play Hamlet, you're going to be measured against all the other Hamlets that have come before you. So it was just another interpretation, and it was only after I started to read the book, or reread the book, and I met le Carré, that I could sort of physically and vocally and all of that start to sort of put him together. I mean, I stole a lot from John, or David as we know him. When he sits in a chair, you know, he sits slightly off the right angle, where he leans, and there's certain sort of mannerisms that I pinched, and maybe Guinness did. You know, there's a wonderful story where John le Carré had taken Alec Guinness to meet who was then, I guess, the head of the control.
Yeah.
And he was this sort of rather foppish guy, and he had the sort of three-piece and the fob watch, the chain, and a rather sort of bright tie. I think he got the orangey suede shoes that Guinness wore. I think he took them from this guy. And of course Guinness was looking at things like tie pins and buttonholes and cufflinks, and thinking, you know, this was a camera. And this, you know, squirted cyanide, and this was, you know, sort of tape recording devices and all the rest of it. And finally the chap left the lunch and was walking up the street with his umbrella. And Guinness turned to John le Carré and said, "Is that a real umbrella?" Thinking it was, you know, it shot darts or something like that. And le Carré said, "Of course it fucking is."
Yeah, I think he did a little cameo in one of the TV series as a janitor. And here he is at the Christmas party scene, also singing the Russian national anthem. And he plays Agent 009, I think. It's a few seconds, but it's very good.
I can't remember how we got around to it, but he just mentioned that there was a Christmas party once that they had at MI5, I think, and we just thought that was quite a strange idea that MI5 had Christmas parties, and this one got out of hand and people threw bottles out the window, and the police were called to break up the party, and we thought, oh, well, we have to do that would be great. And it was originally just going to be one scene, but it became a very useful scene that we could go back to again and again and flashback, and each time you sort of perspective shifts as you go through it.
Because I think it's the only scene in the film where all the main characters are sort of
It is. It's the only
together.
scene set before kind of the rot of the betrayal sets in. So when they're still, you know, just at the fag end of the golden age.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose this interpretation may not have been done 30 years ago. Because we decided to do quite an emotional take on it, and it's not so much about the Cold War itself, or being dogmatic about East and West, or left or right, or who's right and who's wrong. It's more about. I thought when I started working on this that it was an interesting thing to compare the soldiers in a hot war fighting side by side towards a very defined enemy, compared with these soldiers who can't trust anyone, and anyone could be the enemy, and what the human cost was for these individuals. So I suppose it takes like a historical distance to do this take or this twist on it.
But that just came about because we wanted always to show, the human cost of that war. And in the book, the paranoia from Peter Guillem's work life leaches into his private life. He has a girlfriend who he begins to suspect in some vague way, wonder if she's what she seems. But it was quite ambiguous what he suspected her of, and it took 3 or 4 scenes to set up, and we knew we couldn't do that. So we needed, in one scene, I think there were originally 2 scenes, to show the price he has to pay in his private life for helping Smiley. And it was Bridget came up, I think, with the idea of, well, if he's gay, and with all that meant in the 70s when it was still illegal, that he could be blackmailed, it was something the opposition could use against him. It made him very vulnerable. And if the circus were to turn against him, it was something he had to tidy away. And we checked with le Carré, and he liked the idea of it.
After we decided to ask Gary, it was much easier because I didn't want to do any casting before we had Smiley, so everyone is pretty much casted around him, and I thought that we should have a lot of very different energies in the room, and very different shapes and looks and ages, and because there are so many names to actually navigate through in this story. But it was very joyful, and I think 90% of the cast is our first choices. It was a project that all the actors wanted to participate in.
Well, I mean, in the conference room when we're all sitting around the table, it's 6 degrees of Harry Potter. I think Mark Strong is the only English living actor who has not been in a Harry Potter movie.
Even the owl is from the...
Even the owl.
It's true.
Kieran Hines I'd worked with in 1980 at the Glasgow Citizens Theatre, way back with Kieran and Rylance. And we were Robbie Coltrane from like way back, and I had not seen Kieran for about 27 years. I had not worked with John, and that was a sort of ambition, a career ambition fulfilled on this one, because I've admired John. I mean, he's wonderful, isn't he, John Hurt? I mean, it's just, and I was a fan of John before I even had the idea of being an actor, and so that was that was a great experience. Really, I was very nervous on the first day meeting John. I was like fanboy, around him, and like that. I was like that annoying character on Saturday Night Live. You remember when you were in Midnight Express? So it was a great cast, but I've played these. It's amazing. I've played those cameos where you come in. George. I'm lucky with George because he's kind of. I see him a bit. He's like jazz. And George he builds to the solo, and these guys have to come in, and it's rock and roll. They have to burn from the first bar. They have to come in and make and make their mark, and they all were all up to it. And without someone like, you've got to cast Hayden. You've got to be very careful the way you cast Hayden. You need a fantastic actor who can deliver the scene, and deliver that moment at the end. And Colin he's sublime in it. He's just up for it. So it was. It really is. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's the sort of. Talk about the best of British. Yeah. It's a phenomenal cast of actors.
I think it was a couple of months after the shoot. he won the Oscar.
Oh, right.
He was travelling.
Okay.
He was doing all the campaigning and all of that stuff for it at the weekends. So when he wasn't working for us, you know, we'd often say to him, "You fancy a dinner Saturday night?" And he's walking to the trailer, taking off his tie, saying, "No, I'm off to America. I'm off to America." My bad impersonation, Colin Firth.
No, we purely worked from the book, but then the big adaptation was the TV adaptation, which, as I said, is generally like 99% very, very loyal to the book. And we knew we couldn't do that. We knew we couldn't work in the same way. We didn't have the screen time to do that, so we had to make the poem of the book. We had to make something that was going to be smaller, but hopefully would be intense and vivid, and would capture the spirit and tone of it. So I think from the cast to Thomas to Bridget and I, the book was the Bible. We always worked from the book. Yeah, it was very scary. I mean, we were Bridget and I felt the sort of dominant feeling the dominant memory I have from starting this was just fear. Just kind of thinking, we're going to fuck it up, and then everyone will hate us, and we'll get hanged. But David was just very, very lovely, and much more cavalier almost with the material than we were. I was quite precious about the book, and he was much more kind of, let's do something new. If you want to do something new, it's fine. And that was very liberating, and he was very supportive and generous like that.
But I mean, I had the same. You have the same fear. The first question I asked, I think, after they cast me, was, "Is le Carré okay with it?" He likes me, doesn't he? I mean, he thinks it's a good idea. You have to get the blessing from the Pope. I think the family have seen them. The kids. There's a big family. Lots of grandchildren. He actually called me and said, he said, whatever it was, we're off to Blockbuster. Which one should I get?
What did you say?
I don't know, I think I said State of Grace. Well, that's what they're saying. I mean, if the same creative team were to reconnect and come back together, and they're talking about Smiley's people. Yeah.
We'd love to do it, and we just need to find the right timing and to mature it and to discuss it, and that would be great.
Well, it's very satisfying, as I've said. I've waited. I mean, he's my hero for casting me, because I've waited. I feel like I've waited 30 years to play something like this. I think that the notes were there. But you are somewhat at the mercy. excuse me. You're at the mercy of the industry and the imagination of the people that are casting you, and one can get, I think, and I've been, have been a little typed, and and it takes people like a Tomas or a Chris Nolan to come along and see something else that other directors haven't. But it was wonderful. You've got this incredible book, and even in the telling of cinematically the telling of the story, you have a scene that was maybe reduced from a chapter or 10 pages down to a sort of a composition, an image, 4 lines, and a look. You always felt that you had a life, an inner life, because the book was the subtext that you brought to it, and these movies, you know, like Batman and Harry Potter, you know, you are asked to turn its exposition. You have to make exposition and plot character, and here you can you feel that you can really live. And as acting teacher, Meisner, an American acting teacher, who said that an ounce of behaviour is worth a pound of words, and one really here gets to breathe and to live a life. But you've got to have someone who's got to shoot it. You know, if people like my performance, you know, I give a lot of credit to Tomas, who lets it breathe and lets it live and photographs it and doesn't cut it to tatters. You know, you're victim sometimes of, you know, a performance is there, but you see the finished result, and it's there's too much cutting. So I'd love to play Mr. Smiley again.
KARLA isn't in the book, except by reference using there as a character, and Anne's only in it for a few scenes in flashback. And we felt that if we put her in as in a few scenes in flashback, she'd be kind of like a bit player, and really she's more significant than that. She's, along with KARLA, she's, you know, one of the most important figures in Smiley's life. So we like the idea of what if we don't see her, she kind of grows in significance. They become the kind of the ghosts, you know, haunting Smiley throughout the film. She and KARLA.
This was a location I found several years ago. Before this, by coincidence, I was walking around in Budapest. I was there visiting a film festival, and I found this strange place. It's called the Parisian Galleria, and it's totally empty, and I don't know why, but it's very central in the central Budapest, and I thought it would be a great place to do a scene in for some reason, and then this project turned up, and I thought it would be great to be working there. And then we later on heard that this particular place was actually used as a meeting point for spies during the Cold War, but we didn't know when we did it. So that was spooky.
I guess, well, you know, particularly with the UK, I was pleased that it was a film that people went to go and see. You know, that it was nice that it was reviewed well, but also that it did good box office, and I hadn't ever really been certain whether that would happen really for this kind of film, you know, because it's I don't think it's difficult, but you know, it's not maybe as easy as your average movie. So I was very pleased with that.
Well, I mean, if you thought the reviews were gushing here, they are. I mean, we got the royal flush with the main with you know, if that's anything to measure it by. It is the best reviewed movie of the year, next to The Artist, and midweek sales, ticket sales are staggering, and so it's just so it's refreshing that people want to, that there is an audience for it, and one feels a certain, you know, you do feel that you're exporting the best of British, you know what I mean, and that a British, particularly a British film, can go to America and just completely fucking knock them off their feet, you know, and that we can still do it, you know. The British are coming.
Thomas,
the Empire Strikes Back.